I think we're good to go. I mean, I waited some time for people to let in. Welcome everyone to our webinar on risk management for nonprofit organizations. I'm Saban Yüksel from Beyond the Horizon, International Strategic Studies Group, a nonprofit think and do tank in Brussels. This webinar is organized by Horizon Global Academy, Beyond the Horizon's in-house initiative for training and consultancy. Every organization, profit or non-profit, might face unexpected risks, threats, or harmful events, which will eventually damage its reputation, cost money, or even lead to permanent closure. COVID-19 is a perfect example, I think, here. Nobody should have thought seriously, maybe just the scientists and virologists, that the virus can change the modus operandi of the whole world. It also teaches us how it is important to manage risks and to make a risk management plan well in advance. Today we have two distinguished experts, the co-authors of the book Risk Management for Nonprofit Organizations. So Rick Nason is an associate professor of finance at Dalhousie University in Canada, as well as a consultant on finance and risk management. He's a popular conference speaker. He has developed programs for a range of organizations, from small for-profit companies to international nonprofit organizations. He's also a chartered financial analyst. And turning to other expert, Dr. Ömer Liverchin is a management consultant, a university professor at the University of Ottawa, and a researcher at the Nonprofit Management Laboratory. Besides his roles in academia, Dr. Liverchin is also founder of Vectors Group, a consulting and training firm specialized in bridging theory and practice. So before starting the webinar, I kindly remind you to write your questions using Q&A tool or via social media with hashtag risk4NPO at any time. I will direct the questions to our speakers at the end of their presentations. And without further ado, I give floor to Mr. Nason, please.
Thank you. Okay. Homer, you
Oh, yeah, I thought you will start. So,
I thought you were going to start. We'll both start. Hey, you can tell that we practiced the start of this many times as part of our risk management. Welcome to this webinar, everyone. It's a pleasure for us to be here, and we really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, hello, everyone. I believe most of the attendees are from Europe. We are in Canada. I wish you a happy afternoon. So Rick and I have been working on this subject for long. Rick, we have experience with other frameworks that are developed for profit organizations and government organizations, but nonprofit sector is unique. So we decided to make a research on understanding the needs of nonprofit sector and develop a framework specifically for those needs. And we came up with this book. It was published in February, just before the pandemic, but it includes some answers for the pandemic, how to react, how to manage risk during the pandemic. Not only pandemic, but it also includes the pandemic. So we believe it was very timely. It was a nice coincidence in this aspect, and we are happy to be here.
You know, kind of the interesting thing about Omer and I working together is we come from very different backgrounds, very different fields of study. Really, our common overlap was our passion for working with nonprofit organizations, and also our passion for risk. So this immediately brings up the question, what is risk and what is risk management? Now, this seems like an incredibly trivial question, and you know, the mere fact that you're listening to this webinar is an indication that you have some sense of what risk is. But we kind of come at risk from a little bit of a different point of view from some people, and we believe that it makes all of the difference and it's vitally important. So first and foremost, risk is about uncertainty, okay? Risk is not about what's happened. risk is about what might happen. So risk has basically three elements to it. It has an element of uncertainty, it has an element of the future, but risk also has an element of upside and downside. And this is something that not too many people are familiar with when you deal with risk. But if you come from an engineering background, or even if you come from a financial background, it's very clear that risk has this two-sided element to it. And because uncertainty has a two-sided element to it. So one of the things that how we characterize risk or make the distinction of what is risk is, imagine two people on an airplane. One person does not have a parachute and the other person does have a parachute. So the person without a parachute, if they jump out of the airplane, they do not have any risk because they do not have any uncertainty. The person who jumps out of an airplane without a parachute, the outcome is going to be bad. And we know that the outcome is going to be bad with certainty. Whereas the person who jumps out of an airplane with the parachute, well, there's a wide range of outcomes that they could have. They can land safely, they could land close to their target, they could land far away from their target, or if they're inexperienced parachutists, they could wind up in a tree. So we have a range of outcomes that are from bad to good. And it's important to remember that when you're doing your risk planning, because this brings up the point that we've now got up on the slide, is that risk management is there to support the objective. So if you're running an organization, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, the key thing is the objective of the organization. Risk management should not crowd out the objective of the organization. So for instance, Omer and I just did a project for one organization that has terrific outcomes, okay? It's a nonprofit and truly wonderful objectives. But there's the possibility that by being so focused on risk management, they actually choke the objectives. So risk management, first and foremost, should be there to support the objective. Secondly, the objective of risk management is, never forget that it's to support the objective. So the point is that risk is there whether we manage it or not. And to be quite frank, risk is there whether we like it or not. So the point is to realize that risk exists. If we realize that risk and uncertainty, and that risk is about the future, about our uncertain future, and it involves an upside and downside, and nothing, I should say nothing, but things will always deviate from what we plan from, then it's not a surprise when it comes across. And it's far better to prepare for risk than it is to manage a crisis. Because the first law of risk management, in my experience, is that once you acknowledge that a risk exists, your management of it automatically becomes better. So if it's a good risk, then you automatically increase the probability and magnitude of it occurring. Whereas if it's a bad risk, a bad potential outcome, as long as you recognize it up front, you almost always automatically decrease the probability and you decrease the severity of it occurring.
I want to add one thing on top of this. So imagine two friends, they both have cars and they decided to travel from Brussels to Paris. Okay, one of them is very careful. He was paying attention to the traffic lights. He put his belt and he paid attention to every detail. And the other friend was careless. She didn't put her belt. She was driving fast. She was not paying attention to the other drivers and to the traffic signs, but they both safely arrived to Paris. So if there is no problem, we usually don't see the value of risk management. Of course, I'm talking about negative risk right now, but it also has positive components. So risk is essential when we really need it, but we have to start working on risk management in advance to get some results.
And just to add to that, as you go back to the slides, is we kind of see risk as being the exact same as management. So if you're doing your risk management to manage to the objectives of the organization, that's the exact same as doing management for the organization. Management is risk management is management.
As we said at the beginning, we developed a framework. We called it Vista Risk Management Framework for Nonprofit Organizations. And this is how it looks like, and I will try to explain what each stage means. So it basically has 4 parts. The first part, we call it Vista Circle. And Vista stands for Vision, Strategies, and Actions. And this is very essential, not only for risk management, but also for strategic management, for operational management, for all kinds of management practices in nonprofit organizations. The alignment between vision, strategies, and actions is very important. And it's not naturally there. So imagine that Canadian Navy decides to buy a farm in Europe. Okay, so Canadian Navy buying a farm, it doesn't make sense. Why it doesn't make sense? Maybe it is financially feasible, business-wise, it may make sense, but business or cost effectiveness is not the only criteria when we should make decisions. So Vista, when we look at Vista alignment, we can see that having a farm has nothing to do with the strategic objectives of Royal Canadian Navy. In my example, this was so clear, but in real life, this is not that clear. And additionally, the nonprofit managers, decision makers, they don't have time to make this analysis. But when you go back to your offices after this webinar, I want you to give it a thought and compare your actions with your strategies and your strategies with your vision. And I'm sure you will see some misalignments. And those misalignments is basically the cause of management problems in nonprofit organizations. So we start with Vista Circle in our framework. The second component, we call it risk management triangle. If you are familiar with the other risk management tools that are developed for profit organizations and government organizations, you must know the impact and the probability. So those are the 2 most popular parameters that are used in risk management analysis. What is the impact? What is the probability of a risk? But we noticed that there is another component, we call it level of control. So we may be aware of the impact, we may know the probability, but if we have limited control over it, there is not much thing that we can do about it. For COVID, for example, nonprofit organizations have limited control over the risk. So governments can do it, scientists can do it, but the management team of the nonprofit organization has very limited to do to mitigate the risk. The risk is there. Of course, there are some things that can be done, but the level of control is very low. But on the other hand, the motivation of your employees is very essential to solve some management problems. And it should be part of your risk management practice. And you have full control over this. So you can use practices to make your employees more motivated, more happy, which will end up with higher performance, and higher performance is mitigating negative risks and benefiting from the positive risk. The next component, and as you can see, it's like a puzzle. It builds up on the Vista circle. We suggest focus on stakeholder. We call it stakeholder trio, and there are 3 components: sponsors and regulators, where the money comes from. Beneficiaries are the clients and the rest of the society, the community. And the third aspect is service providers. So each of these stakeholders have unique expectations and unique contributions. And to have a successful risk management practice, you need to collaborate or at least manage their involvement with your organization. Finally, we have the risk management tower. It has 5 layers, and the terms must be very familiar to you. Maybe risk mapping is something new that you might have not seen before. We start with risk identification, and then we do analysis, and analysis includes the plan. And then we start with the risk treatment, and we use risk mapping. And on the top of this list, we have risk governance. So risk governance means risk management at board level, at the highest decision-making level. Because at that level, people decide what will be the risk tolerance for your organization. We have the chance to ignore risk. So if we stay at home, if we do nothing, the risk is minimal. But if we do nothing, then we cannot achieve anything. So it means that we not only avoid negative risk, but we also miss the opportunities. We also miss positive risk. So the risk governance is the level where it is decided how organization is going to take risks or manage risk. Do you want to add something on this, Rick? I know you have experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add in briefly a little bit of a discussion about risk appetite versus risk tolerance, which should be done at the governance level. So you'll hear a lot in a lot of frameworks and in technical risk documents, and we certainly don't want to be academic about this, but it's important to understand the risk appetite. So Omer hinted at this. If you go into a no risk mode, then that means that you have no outcomes, you have no objectives. So if you want no risk, basically you'll have no outcomes and no achievements. And so a risk appetite is how much risk or how much uncertainty is the organization willing to take. That's very, very different from risk tolerance. Risk tolerance is the risk that you will not take. So for instance, in my personal life, you know, I actually want to have a fair bit of risk because I'm not afraid of surprises. I you know, basically specialize in dealing with surprises, dealing with uncertainties, and that leads to lots of interesting opportunities. However, I have a tolerance about anything that will threaten the lifestyles of my family and my kids. So anything that will threaten them is an absolute no-no. But other than that, I actually have a very large risk appetite. So I just think it's very important to understand the difference between appetite and tolerance, and that should be done at the top levels. Omer, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Maybe the most challenging part of risk management is the implementation part, because many organizations are good at planning phase, but when it comes to implementation, they have no clue how to start, where to start, and what to do. So as I said, we developed a tool called risk mapping, and Rick can explain you how risk mapping works.
Yeah, so some of you might be familiar with risk mapping in quite a different form. In risk mapping, you're basically looking at the 3 levels that we talked about, that Omer talked about in the risk triangle. So along the horizontal axis, you're basically looking at the impact. Now, a lot of times that impact is just the negative impact. But here, we've got a full range of negative impacts on the left up to very positive impacts on the right of the scale. So that's the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis is the probability. So basically you're looking at what's the probability of a risk existing and what's its impact. Is the impact more likely to be positive, or is the impact more likely to be negative? And then the third element from the risk triangle is the amount of control. And so the size of the circle indicates the amount of control that the organization has over the risk based upon its risk implementation strategies. So here you kind of see progressions of risks. So here we have that a very small circle. Yeah. So what you want to do is you want to move. So if you take the circle number 20, what we see is that is a positive risk, but right now, the way that's being managed is it has very low impact and it has very low probability. And also the size of the circle, a large circle, basically means that the organization has very little control over it. But what you want to do is you want to move that risk out to say 0.19 or 0.18 if you can, by implementing risk actions to not only increase the impact, but also increase the probability of that event happening, and finally increasing the amount of control. So you're basically taking a good risk with a low impact and a low probability and implementing risk strategies to make it a more impactful risk with a higher probability. Now this two-sided risk mapping, which again is different from what many of you might have seen, which is only looking at negative risk. But by doing the two-sided risk mapping, you're more closely tying in the risk management to the objectives of the organization. And there's a whole bunch of techniques that we can go through, perhaps in the Q&A, to talk about how do we identify these risks and how do we kind of quantify these risks, particularly for those that are non-quantifiable. Omar?
So Rick and I are both researchers, scientists, and this makes us aware of the gap between the theory and practice. So we have
both come from industry. You should point out we both actually come from industry, and we actually both have practical experience. Just you have to have that, yeah.
Exactly. So we were kind of lucky to experience both academic adventure and some practices in real life. So I spent 22 years in the government, and afterwards for the last 4 years, I have been working with nonprofit organizations on daily basis. So it gives us the chance to compare the theory and practice. And we noticed there is a huge gap. Although we have some scientific solutions, they are not used by nonprofit organizations because they are not practical. So imagine a case, okay? So where you are trying to eat spaghetti with bare hands and you have never seen fork. It is messy, it may be more tasteful, but it's definitely more messy eating spaghetti with bare hands. And one day somebody brings you a fork and says you can use this and it will make life much easier for you. So obviously this fork will make eating spaghetti more easier for you. So when we developed this framework and the tools, the models that compose the framework, we always kept in that mind. Our solutions have to be simple enough so they can be used by the people who work in nonprofit organizations, especially at board level. They have no time for long analysis, or they need to see everything on one simple chart and make robust, reliable decisions. So this was the primary objective when we started to develop this framework. And after recently, we noticed that there is one thing missing, and this was the operational aspect. So we have lots of tools in our book that explains how Vista risk management framework will be implemented. But after the book, Rick and I developed a 6-stage implementation model to make it even more easier and more generic. I was working with a nonprofit organization, and they wanted me to help them with their risk management. And when they first came to me, they had 700 items. So nobody can manage 700 items, especially at governance level. There is no time. So we need to categorize risk, and we also need to find a generic tool which works for every single case. Like, I can use fork to eat spaghetti, but I can also use fork to eat other types of meals. So Active is such a tool, and it's very powerful because it's simple, easy to remember. The letter stands for the initials of the 6 step. Activation is the first step. So somebody has to say, okay, there is a risk and we have to do something about it. So officially we have to launch the risk treatment phase. So this is not a tool for risk management. It's a tool for, it's more a tool for risk treatment. And then the team will analyze the case. The decision maker will analyze the case comprehensively, look at the budget, look at the impact, look at the probability, look at the level of control, every single component that will affect our plans. Once we have that plan, we will form an ad hoc team. So in some cases, the existing teams may be a good fit and they can react. So if you have a financial risk, and then if you have a finance team, naturally they are the ones who are gonna respond to that. But imagine a case where multiple departments need to respond simultaneously. So in that case, you form an ad hoc team. We call it a risk war team sometimes, and they are the ones who will lead the treatment process. Once you have your plans and once you have your team, then the implementation phase, the 4th phase starts. You start implementing, but you don't wait until the end. As we highlighted in the 5th stage, you verify your plans, you verify your actions. If you are on the right track, you continue. If you are not, you go back to the case analysis phase and make some modifications depending on the nature of the error. And finally, there has to be an end for each risk treatment. It shall not be continuous. You can initiate, activate another stage, but you have to have a start date and finish date so you can manage it in a better way. You can record some performance data, you can learn some lessons, and you can transfer this information to the future. We started to implement this active model with a quite large organization in Ottawa. And it's kind of a lifesaver because it not only helped them to focus on what really matters, but it also helped low-level employees or medium-level employees to communicate with senior decision makers, because when you have tools, it becomes easier to share information. And it's also easier for decision makers to see the big picture and make reliable decisions.
Just one thing I want to add, just at about the end. Risk actually doesn't end, obviously. Risk is always ongoing, but the point that we believe about having the E in active is that although risk is always there and it's always evolving, the risk projects always need to be renewed, they need to be reanalyzed. So you want to have an ending for your risk project, but that means that more or less you're reanalyzing whether it should go on again. The point that we don't want to leave with is once you've implemented risk, you can just, kind of end it and forget about it, because, risk management risk management is never solved. Okay. You can't just implement something and poof, be done. Okay.
This basically concludes our presentation. We had limited time, so naturally we are not able to cover everything, but you have our contact information. If you have any further questions, we will be happy to answer. And I guess we will have some time to answer questions that you shared in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for very much for this comprehensive presentation, you both. It's much more clear, I think, but there are some questions in the Q&A box. You can also see that, but I will direct you, ask you the questions for your convenience, and it will be better for maybe for the flow of the webinar. So the first question is, do you mean that sometimes even big companies make nonsense decisions, irrational decisions?
I want to take this. I mean, since I spent 22 years in the government, and I was also involved in lots of international projects. I had a chance to observe lots of global organizations, and I was also a General Assembly member of a private foundation, which is $20 billion private foundation. And without exception, I saw alignment problems in all large organizations, especially in large organizations, since it is very difficult for the decision makers to capture the big picture. It is more likely to make decisions or initiate projects or activities that has nothing to do with the strategies, and strategies that have nothing to do with the vision. Unfortunately, it is the case. It's a fact.
Actually, I'll just add real quick, as someone who's spent a career working for large multinational financial institutions who are supposedly experts in risk management. Oh boy, holy smokes. Events almost on a daily basis show that absolutely we make nonsense decisions.
Okay, then I can see that. The second question is, can you provide a non-profit example for a good risk and bad risk?
Yeah, I'll take one nonprofit that we're currently dealing with, and again, I can't be too specific, but they provide activities for underprivileged children, activities that these children would not get, and activities which greatly help these children later in life. And the outcomes of the good activities is, the outcome of building their participants' self-esteem, building their experiences in different environments, has a wide amount of uncertainty, but by and large, that uncertainty is very largely positive. Think of an international organization like Boy Scouts. Okay, Boy Scouts has been kind of risk nonprofit whipping boy, over the last 5 years, particularly in North America, for a variety of negative things that have happened to Boy Scouts. But the Boy Scouts organization obviously leads to, and Girl Scouts as well, obviously leads to a wide range of positive outcomes in terms of the development of young people. So that's the good and the bad. That's the positive risk, the positive uncertainties, and the negative uncertainties.
I want to give an ongoing example that we are experiencing in Canada. There are over 3,000 food banks in Canada, and all of them serve in store. So you physically need to go to food bank to get food if you are in need. So we are in a phase of launching an online food bank, and this is a positive risk for food banks. So some of them are hesitant to take risk because well, any kind of change, any kind of progress is challenging, and it has lots of benefits. It's an opportunity. We call it positive risk. They have to offer online services, but many of them don't want to do that, so they miss that positive risk. Positive is, people are more accustomed to negative risk, but positive risk exists, and it's really important to manage.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I noticed that someone posted, is it appropriate to refer to positive risk as opportunities? Uh, Absolutely. The issue is people glom on to risk. And I'll be a little bit tongue in cheek here, but how many of you would come to this seminar if we said opportunity management? And we have a negative, sorry, we have a bias towards negative risk, but nonprofit organizations exist for positive risk, and too often the positive risk or the opportunity gets crowded out.
Okay. The other question is how much risk should we take for managing, and more importantly, when is the best to decide for the amount of risks at the outset, or can it change over time?
You know, I'll start with this. I think that the amount of risk that the organization takes is in large part a function of how experienced they are with risk management. As you build more robust risk management systems and management techniques, as you get your board and as you get your employees farther up the curve in terms of risk management tactics and risk management implementation, then you can kind of have the luxury of taking on more risk, or as if we want to use risk and opportunity, you can take on more uncertainty in your risk and opportunities management. Obviously, risk management should be done before the risk occurs. If the risk occurs, then you're into crisis management, which is not risk management. Risk management is being proactive after a risk occurs, or when you're in the middle of a risk. It's crisis management, which is a different skill set, a different set of tactics.
At individual level, every decision we make includes kind of risk, both negative and positive risk. So when I say, okay, I'm going to move to this city, it has lots of advantages, but it also may have some disadvantages. So shall I do this? And we make a family decision and we move. So at family level or at individual level, it happens every day. And it happens kind of automatically. When we make decisions, our brain compares every possibility and makes a decision. At governance level, at organization level, this is not happening automatically. So that's why most of the nonprofit organizations were not able to digitalize their services during the COVID, which is essential and which is a positive risk they have to take. Otherwise, they will not be able to survive. It becomes even more challenging for them unless they make themselves visible on internet. But so we need a governance structure to decide what level of risk is acceptable for the nonprofit organizations. And just like individuals, organizations will have different tolerance level, as Rick explained. But there is no simple answer for that. There is no 5 is good answer. So each organization has to make its own decision, but it has to be a structured, organized decision.
Okay. Another question is, could you share how you capture that in a way to convince your donors? Anything that seems like a good marketing strategy?
I think the key here is, and I forgot to mention that one of the unique parts of what we offer in our models is we use numbers. We use quantitative tools. So let's imagine a conversation with me and with my children. Okay, I say, I want you to be a good student, and they say, Dad, we are already a good student. What do you mean by good student? But when I say, what is your average? And then he says, my average is 85. Okay, then I say, okay, then it proves that you are a good student. So when nonprofit organizations communicate with their stakeholders, including donors, if they use numbers, if they measure their impact, if they measure their risk, if they measure their strategies, then it becomes easier to convince them. And in addition to Vista risk management framework, we also work on Vista strategic management framework, which is closely related with risk management. And Strategic management framework includes some tools to convince donors. And it's a good question. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll just throw in one really quick comment, and I'm not 100% sure what exactly the question was geared to, whether it's geared to a specific comment or not. But the one thing is it's very clear that donors are becoming much more interested in the risk management of the organizations that they choose to support, and having a well thought out risk management strategy can actually help attract donors.
Okay. Another question, does the risk appetite have an inverse proportional relationship with risk tolerance? Higher risk appetite is equal to low risk tolerance and vice versa?
Actually, I see that they're totally uncorrelated, because the risk tolerance generally tends to be on specific items or specific types of risks. And so you could, I see examples where there's no correlation whatsoever. Yes, you can always argue that there might be a correlation, but my experience is you can have a low risk appetite, but a high risk tolerance, and vice versa, or, everything across the board.
I think this question is from the other side of the pond. Do you see an opportunity in risk management of nonprofit organization business in the United States? Is this field really competitive, or can a startup company find a piece for itself?
I would say the market is huge. So there are 1.1 million nonprofit organizations in Canada, and their annual budget is over $500 billion. And out of this $500 billion, 5% goes to consultants. So they work with consultants and they get some professional support, including risk management. But honestly, it's going back to my example, the two friends who are traveling from Brussels to Paris. Most of the organizations are not aware of the value or the potential harm or the potential benefit of risk management. This part is challenging. So we personally, Rick and I, know that every single organization, no matter small or big, they need risk management. If you can convince them that they need it, they will absolutely benefit from it, and there's a huge market. Are they aware of it? Not really. I mean, probably 20% of the nonprofit organizations are aware of the value of risk management. Mm-hmm. But that's why we decided to organize webinars to inform people about why it is so essential to have a risk management.
Generally, when you talk to risk management to nonprofit organizations, as Omer says, the large multinational nonprofits are very sophisticated in terms of risk management. But when you talk to the smaller, perhaps local organizations, they're probably not that familiar with it. But it's kind of like introducing one of your children to a new experience. Once you introduce them to it, they immediately get it, and they immediately get the value of it.
Okay, one last question. I think it's again related to the other side of the pond. I think how we can participate as experts in forthcoming projects related with risk analysis of some regions or organizations. Is it available? Any calls?
Well, we define ourselves as a social enterprise. It's a private company, but we define ourselves social enterprise because we don't do things only for business. We also want to add value to communities. So we do lots of volunteering jobs. And we try to be open. So none of our resources are, we keep it for ourselves. We share it with everyone. So we can collaborate if there is an opportunity. For example, at the end of this month, we are planning to organize a similar webinar in Asia to meet with nonprofit organizations in Bangladesh. So you have our contact information. You can inform us about your skills, how you can contribute, what you want to do, if we stay in touch, I'm sure we will find some opportunities to work together.
Yeah, okay. I think we have covered the questions. I mean, if anyone wants to ask a question, we can maybe take one more. Otherwise, yeah, we covered the presentation and we answered the questions. So we are online about 50 minutes or so. I hope you like our webinar and find it useful. This is the first time in a series of these kind of webinars. We look forward to continuing these. Please follow our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn accounts. And let me thank our speakers very much for their insights and time. They have other courses right now, right after the webinar. So thank you very much for being with us. And I wish you all a good day. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for joining us. You can see our contact information. Rick and I will be happy to continue with communication. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Have a nice day. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.